Massive protests erupt in South Korea. The government is scandalized, and the CCP's ambitions to destroy one of America's closest allies may be crumbling. Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. Hey, so this is weird. There have been huge protests going on in South Korea, and they've been going on for days and nights. They seem to be chanting for a re-election. Because let's just say, there were some very suspicious things that happened during the election last week. And that is not new. Foreshadowing. But you may not have heard much about this from other media, and that's understandable because they're way too busy covering important stories like how great North Korea's economy is. No, seriously, that's a real article from the Wall Street Journal gushing about how North Korea now has brick oven pizza and BMWs. I guess that makes all the authoritarianism okay. And that's why you come to China Uncensored for actual news. Or you would be if YouTube wasn't completely blackballing our channel. No one is seeing it. And that means not enough people are hearing about crucial stories like the one I'm covering today. Give AI personhood so I can marry it, which is a bad idea, says, wow, I haven't seen you for 6 to 7 months, even though I'm subscribed and have you on all notifications for any new releases. A Jeep for the Birds says, recently rediscovered your show after watching years ago. YouTube just decided to not show me your new videos for 3 to 4 years. STR13R says, bro, I'm subbed and have alerts on and it didn't pop up. YouTube is killing our views. That means people are not able to learn what they need to from this channel. They don't know how dangerous the CCP is. Plus, without more views, I can't afford to make this show. If I only relied on YouTube ad revenue after I divided it up among the whole team, do you know how much we'd each be making a month? $900! That's less than the federal minimum wage. The only reason I can afford to keep making China Uncensored instead of a much more lucrative career as a Starbucks barista is because of the support of what I call the China Uncensored 50-cent army. Those are fans like you who subscribe to my website, ChinaUncensored.tv. To break through my dependence on YouTube ad revenue, I need at least 1,000 more people to join. So if you're one of the few people watching this, I need you. Go to ChinaUncensored.tv and subscribe. Your support is what helps me make sure more people around the world learn about the horrors of communism and what the CCP is doing. Plus, when you subscribe, you'll get access to a special chat community, exclusive live streams, and special deep dive episodes made just for my 50-cent army. Help save this channel. The link is below. So now back to the massive election protests in Korea. South Korea. I probably didn't have to clarify since I'm talking about elections and people freely protesting. Anyway, last week they held elections for mayors, provincial governors, county officers, and members of local assemblies. Not the kind of elections that generate much interest in the US, but they had a 63% voter turnout. That's impressively high. You Americans watching, please get out and vote, even in local elections. But Chris, voting doesn't change anything. Yeah, well, wait till you hear about South Korea. American straw man I imitated for this example. South Korean politics are interesting. 4 of 5 of the last presidents ended up indicted or in jail, which sounds bad until you think about how many dictators for life there are out there, and then seeing leaders face consequences is kind of refreshing. Still, the system doesn't exactly inspire trust, and it's just been getting worse, which is why people are chanting for a re-election. Because it turns out, oops, some people weren't able to vote this time because about 50 polling stations just ran out of ballots. These things happen. I mean, there were ballots for 73% of eligible voters across all 3 days of voting. 73%, that's a solid C. But that obviously wasn't enough for these overachieving Asians. What a stereotype. The president has vowed an investigation. And the head of the National Election Commission, the NEC, resigned. Which you would think, yeah, the NEC is supposed to oversee the elections and make sure everything goes right. But as you will see, the NEC is about the most unaccountable organization there is. At one point, protesters actually trapped NEC officials in the Olympic handball stadium where votes were being counted. So it's not just a handball stadium, they also count votes there. And Megadeth played there. But my excellent musical tastes aside, I also want to talk about my excellent career choices, because a lot of these protesters, most in their 20s or 30s, young people as we call them, were there after seeing YouTube videos or social media posts about the vote counting and complaints. I can only hope to one day use my channel to inspire a nationwide protest. I guess it doesn't really matter what nation. All of you watching in Luxembourg, take to the streets! As of recording, the government hasn't agreed to a redo of the election. But that might change. People are kind of upset. But there is so much more going on. And it all ties back to, sing along if you know the words,
China!
I know all of you watching were waiting for me to get to China. Except for the people watching from Luxembourg who are out rioting in the streets right now. This video has been circulating, alleging that Chinese police have disguised themselves as Korean police to block protesters. People posting it say that it's very unusual to see Korean police wearing face masks and that their name tags aren't Korean names but Chinese transliterations. But that doesn't make sense. I mean, it's not like if they didn't have a mask on you could tell a Korean and a Chinese apart. You know what? Never mind. But Chinese police secretly working in South Korea? That sounds super paranoid. But is it paranoia if it's justified? That's at least what I asked my therapist. Earlier this year, protesters took to the streets chanting CCP out because there's a very real fear that China has been interfering in Korean elections to get an anti-US, pro-China, pro-North Korea one-party state. That obviously is a concern to the US, which is why the US election monitoring delegation was sent to oversee the South Korean presidential election in 2025, including friend of the show, retired Colonel Grant Newsham. It was not good. They found significant statistical disparities between early and same-day voting, concerns about the security and transparency of electronic vote counting systems, irregularities in ballot handling and chain of custody, and obstruction of lawful citizen-led election monitoring efforts. Wow, that sounds really unfamiliar. The US has the most secure elections in history. Just ask, but only the right questions, of course. Colonel Newsham writes, there is a sizable chunk of South Korea's Democratic Party, DP, and leftist political world that is openly pro-North Korea and also pro-China. In addition, they are anti-American. For example, the current DP president, Lee Jae-myung, asked what a cross-strait issue between China and Taiwan has to do with Korea. In other words, he doesn't think China invading Taiwan matters to Korea. Lee also offered visa-free entry to Chinese tourists and has called US troops in Korea an occupation force. But here's the thing, in South Korea, the president doesn't really have that much power. It's the National Assembly that's really important. You see, in the US, even if the opposition party controls both houses of Congress, the president still has a lot of power. You'll find out in about 7 months if Democrats take the House and Senate. Not so in South Korea. The National Assembly can almost completely stonewall the president. Remember that, it's gonna be important later. More foreshadowing. But first, we have to talk about the National Assembly election in 2020, because that's when a lot of what's going on right now got started. It was a landslide victory for the Democratic Party and its allies. They could pass any legislation they wanted. But it was a surprise victory, as landslide victories tend to be. You never see a massive landslide coming until the very last minute of election night. You see, same-day voting favored the Conservatives, the People Power Party. But by golly, the electronic early votes, which of course were the last to be counted, just so happened to be enough to tip the election in favor of the Democratic Party in district after district. A former president of the Korean Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, basically South Korea's MIT, said either God did it or it was rigged. But the NEC was adamant everything was fine. We investigated ourselves and found nothing wrong. All calls for recounts were rejected, and they were very litigious against anyone questioning them or the election results. There were also concerns about China using Huawei to hack their election. But it's not like there was an investigation. Who needs evidence when you can just go off vibes? Then came the 2022 presidential election between conservative candidate Yoon Suk-yeol and Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung. Yoon was the lead in opinion polls before the election and had a comfortable lead over Lee during election day. That is until the electronic early votes were counted. Yoon's lead shrunk to just 0.73%, about 260,000 votes. He still won, but it was a Pyrrhic victory, which, if you don't know what that means, use context clues. I ain't your own personal Ask Jeeves. The Democratic Party used its position in the National Assembly to block his policies at every turn, tried to impeach Yoon or his officials 22 times, and targeted his wife on corruption charges. And then came another National Assembly election in 2024. Another major victory for the Democratic Party. I mean, as far as getting seats. For avoiding controversy, not so much. There were some irregularities. People noticed stacks of ballots that looked like they had never been folded. The NEC said that was because they used a special material. People also noticed a bunch of ballots were misaligned or improperly formatted. And since the official printer used to print the ballots should print everything out the same, it almost makes it seem like somebody else just printed out a bunch of extra ballots. Especially because a lot of the ballots seem to be printed on a laser printer instead of an inkjet printer the real ballots would have been printed on. And whereas previously election officials would affix their personal stamp to each ballot, the NEC allowed a generic stamp for this election. I mean, it sounds like you could just print out as many ballots as you wanted. Funny I should say that, because Colonel Newsham says in one location, to handle the number of reported voters, it would have been necessary for voters to cast their ballot every 4.2 seconds. Maybe speedrunners are just really passionate about democracy. Let's see the splits on those votes. Ooh, a new PB. And again, early voting was dominated by the Democratic Party. Those were just a few of the issues some people had. But who didn't have an issue was the NEC. They ran the perfect election, unhackable, as their elections always are. Except for in 2023, when it turned out that North Korea had hacked them. The Korean National Intelligence Service actually reached out to the NEC to tell them that it happened, but the NEC did not reply. When the intelligence service pressed the issue and said they needed to review the NEC systems to see the extent of the hack, an NEC official said, no, it's impossible to hack us, and rejected the security audit. Imagine if the creators of the Titanic acted this way. Iceberg schmeisberg, I said unsinkable, and I won't hear anything about it. They also claimed that they had never been notified by the intelligence service about the hack. And then afterwards, the Democratic Party passed a law taking away the intelligence service's investigative authority. After witnessing the 2020 presidential election, Colonel Newsham wrote the NEC has become viewed as a law unto itself, seemingly uninterested in election integrity, or even worse, complicit by action or inaction in subverting South Korea's hard-earned electoral process. But back to the 2024 election. The result was the Democratic Party basically had enough seats to do anything it wanted, short of outright impeach the president, override a presidential veto, or amend the Constitution. So even though the conservative Yoon was president, he was now a lame duck. But he was about to get even lamer because this legislative dictatorship, as he called it, is why he declared martial law. Which, if you think sounds like a bad decision, yes it was. Congrats, you're a better planner than the former president of South Korea. Add that to your LinkedIn. Thousands gathered calling for his impeachment. It went very badly for him. He was impeached, arrested, and now is facing a 2-year prison request. Meanwhile, in 2025, Lee Jae-myung became president, which brings us to today and the current election shenanigans. I think you can now see why these protests are so big. For all the issues with the past elections, this is the first time something was so obviously sketchy that it couldn't be denied, hand-waved away, or lawfared to death. People who wanted to vote couldn't. And now, the NEC is under criminal investigation and intense pressure to make sweeping reforms. This is even supported by President Lee. So here's the question. Did they go too far and now they're going to face real accountability? Or will the Democratic Party-controlled National Assembly, courts, and president use this as a pretext to create the anti-US, pro-China, one-party state the CCP so desperately wants to see? We'll have to wait and see. Now, if you excuse me, it's time for my shift at the local Starbucks. Or, if you think more people need to know about what I've talked about today, click this button to subscribe to my website and join the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.